could have been done if we had only been able to send men and women to Washington that understood the Constitution and promised and lived up to their promise and obeyed the Constitution. We would not have the problems that we have today. Now, if that was the cause of our problem, why wouldn't the solution be make sure we send nobody to Washington, House, Senate, or the presidency that doesn't understand the Constitution, and you believe them when they make a promise that they will obey the Constitution? Over these many years, government has constantly grown, and therefore the attack on our personal liberties have been constant and steady. The economy now is in shambles because of constant debt, and there's no recognition that the correction for constant debt is liquidation of debt. Get rid of the debt. If you got into trouble and had too much debt, or your business had too much debt, you couldn't have economic growth if your credit ran out unless you got rid of your debt. You'd have to work harder and pay off your debt, get new jobs, or live more cautiously and live within your means. A country that lives over its means for a long time will be destined to live beneath its means, and that is what's happening right now. The country is poorer because everything is based on debt. And this is the reason the middle class is getting smaller, the middle class is getting poorer, and there's another characteristic of what happens when a country destroys its money and power gravitates into a central location like the federal government. The power then takes the value or takes the wealth of the middle class, it's automatically transferred to the wealthy. And this is what's going to happen. During the bubble formation, Wall Street and the banks, they did quite well during the housing bubble. And then they got to gambling. They got to gambling with these derivatives, and they got themselves over their head. They went bankrupt. And then they come rushing for help to the government and the Federal Reserve and say that you got to bail us out. We're too big to fail. We're too big to fail. The whole economy is going to come down if you don't help us. So what did they do? The Congress and the Federal Reserve bailed them out. And what happened to the bad debt that should be liquidated? The bad debt was dumped on the people. That is what happened. The very people that were supposed to be helped with these government programs and easy credit so everybody would have a house, guess what? They lost their jobs and they lost their houses and they're still suffering. Yep. Economic planning doesn't work unless it's done by the people, not by the government. But we have a system today based on entitlements, and it's based on the assumption that some people have a tough time and we have to help them out. And the bleeding hearts say, look, if you don't want to help the people, that means you're heartless, you don't care about people, you're not a humanitarian. But I've come to the conclusion that the humanitarian instincts of almost all people, whether they disagree on solutions, but we have humanitarian instincts that if the humanitarian instinct drives you to say that we are going to have forced redistribution of wealth, guess what? There's not as much wealth. The humanitarian instinct should drive us to the free market, to property rights and sound money and limited government and less war. Then you will help the maximum number of people and you will have the largest, wealthiest middle class under those conditions. Like a good word, it sounds like a right, but the use of the word entitlement today isn't. That means some people believe they're entitled to what you make and earn and produce. But you don't have a right to somebody else's property, but you should have a right and be entitled to keep what you earn. That's what we need. System is sold to the masses, and the masses believe they're going to always be taken care of, and you're going to have free education and free houses and free medical care. The whole works. And guess what? The entitlement system is built to really help the very wealthy who know how to manipulate the system. And the poor end up with the crumbs, although they were talked into accepting the entitlement system because they thought they were going to get the help necessary. But today, there is a challenge going on because they talk about the wealthy, and I already have, and criticize those who get bailed out, and the very wealthy who benefit from the destruction of money and through the inflationary system. But you don't want to throw out everybody who's wealthy. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy if you earn your money honestly. That's a big difference. The wealthy get wealthy because they deliver a service to the people. If we make an individual wealthy because they provide a good product and we vote for that product and they become wealthy, but they get no benefits, they get nothing special from the government, no bailouts, no contracts or anything, they should be entitled to keep that. But those who are in the military-industrial complex or in the financial system that benefits from the monetary system that we have, they're not entitled to that. They don't deserve the bailouts, and they should be challenged, so we have to sort out the two. If we do that, I believe we can return to a much more prosperous economy where we can have growth and jobs once again. System is wasteful and it encourages corruption. A lot of people complain about the lobbyists having control, and they do. There's too much control by lobbyists in Washington. But the lobbyist is a consequence. They are the symptom of the problem. Because lobbying is something that is encouraged by the fact that the government's running an auction. You know, H.L. Mencken said it was an auction off of stolen goods, and that's what the government does. So people have an incentive, the business people, everybody has an incentive to go to Washington because there's this redistribution of wealth and they have this incentive. Now, what we have to do is get the power out of Washington, get the money out of Washington. You won't have the incentive to go up and try to buy this power and control. But today, we have a system that has been totally undermined, and the special interests do have control of it. But another way we could solve this, if we, once again, had only those people who were dedicated to the Constitution, who weren't influenced by these special interests and couldn't be bought on, this would all come to an end as well. Well, did the lobbyists come to you and lobby you? And I said, well, on occasion they did, but they found out that it didn't do any good, you know. The House Floor Brigade was in 1998, believing that there was war coming, and I was trying to head it off. But that didn't happen until after 9/11. 9/11, a terrible day in our history, but I think it's been misunderstood. I do not believe that we were attacked, nor will we be attacked because we're free and prosperous. I do not believe that is the case. But when there is a crisis, whether it's an economic crisis that requires us to bail out those in privileged positions, or when we have an international crisis like 9/11, it's used as an excuse to do the very things they've been wanting to do all along. Yeah. Of course, it turned out there were no weapons of mass destruction. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Guess what? There's Al-Qaeda in Iraq today. And this whole idea that, well, we have to go wherever they are. The terrorists are everywhere. And there are Taliban everywhere. We have to kill every Taliban. But you know, the Taliban are not the Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda are radical enough and they're incensed enough that they want to come here and they do want to kill us because of the problems that we've had with our foreign policy. The Taliban are people who want to just foreigners off their land, whether they're the Soviets or whether it's the United States or the French or the British. They just want to be left alone. And if we're going to try to that is, if they are defending their homeland and we're trying to kill them and they want to kill us because we're there, the more we go in, the more Taliban there's going to be, the more the people, it's a catch-22, there's no ending to it. That is why the non-interventionist foreign policy of the founders makes so much sense. Let them deal with their problems, we'll deal with our problems here at home. Will say, well, off quickly and say, oh, you're a bunch of isolationists, you don't want to deal with the world. And you know what? It's exactly the opposite. Guess who the isolationists are? The isolationists are the ones who want to put sanctions on all these countries to punish them. And what do? They really punish them and have an overthrow of government? They solidify the power and bring out their own nationalism. So when we try to punish the Iranians, we solidify the power of Ahmadinejad. It does the opposite. I don't know whether they do it on purpose or they just don't know what they're doing, but it isn't good. It doesn't work. And but sanctions are a part of the isolationism that they accuse us of. And because the founders, and what I believe is that we should be friends with as many people as we can, trade with people, and travel to the world. Matter of fact, I think it's about time we remove the sanctions from Cuba. Why can't we travel to Cuba? We've had sanctions on Cuba for 50 years, and the Castros are still there. It didn't work very well. But I'll tell you what, in the theory behind what the founders thought and what free markets describe is that when you're free, having free trade in markets, there's a self-interest involved to stay that way and not fight each other. You know, we were fighting the communists, we were fighting the Chinese, we were fighting the Vietnamese communists, and of course that war went very poorly. We lost that war. We came home. 1 million Vietnamese died, and 60,000 Americans died, but we had to come home. And they warned us. They said there would be this horrible, horrible thing. There would be a domino effect, and the communists would take over the whole world. Well, guess what? It must be free markets that moved in that direction, left our country, because now our banker's in China. So it hasn't worked all that well. But just think now, we do trade and talk to China under imperfect situations, but just think, we're not killing each other. When I was in high school, you know, we were killing each other. A teacher of mine went off to Korea and didn't come back. It made no sense to me. But what about Vietnam? Now we trade with them, we invest over there, they come over here, imperfect, we're imperfect, they're imperfect. But just think how much more was achieved in peace, which was never achieved in all that fighting for 20 years. The atmosphere that surrounds war, and various kinds of wars, whether it's the wars overseas, or the atmosphere dealing with civil liberties here at home, when you have another war that goes on against the American people that causes so much trouble and so much undermining our civil liberties, that is that onerous war on drugs that has caused so much trouble. The war on drugs has been going on. The modern day war on drugs has occurred since the early 1970s. There was a more minimal war prior to that, but prior to 1912, there was no war on drugs, and a lot of people survived, you know, even in those years. They could go out and buy whatever they wanted. But the war on drugs is very, very dangerous. But the war on drugs is, matter of fact, drugs are very, very dangerous. But the war on drugs, I think, is more dangerous than the drugs themselves. I do want to make a very strong point, both as a physician, as a parent, and as a grandparent. All drugs are dangerous. Illegal drugs are dangerous. The war on drugs are dangerous. But prescription drugs are very dangerous as well. But certainly if we would follow the rules about giving more prerogatives to the states, some states now are just making token efforts to say that people who smoke marijuana for medical reasons should be allowed to. A few states have passed laws that way. What happens? We have the heavy hand of the federal government come down. They undo this whole principle of states' rights and say that we will tell you what you can do. And our our federal government has been known to arrest sick people in wheelchairs, individuals who are getting benefits from marijuana, and putting them in prison. That makes no sense whatsoever. But the real harm done by the war on drugs, and we can't dismiss the fact that drugs are very dangerous, but the real danger is the undermining of our personal civil liberties, because that is used as an excuse to invade our home without search warrant. It's gotten much worse with this other law that was passed after 9/11, and that is called the Patriot Act, which should be repealed. The Patriot Act, as I've said in the debates, is very unpatriotic.